right, welcome. So we just talked about the Paleolithic period and sort of the 250,000 year period where humans were struggling and moving and setting up and relating and competing, right? And about 12,000 BP or CE, if you were just poor before present. Um, we have this for about 5,000 to 6,000 years. We have this period which we call the Neolithic period, where sort of this period between Paleolithic hunting and gathering before civilizations, where humans are transitioning to this more complex world. Um, and uh, and there's a lot of reasons. We kind of know like the who, the where, the when, and the what. And this is a good question for. This is a good example of like the big H history of the whys. Like, why did this happen around 12,000 CE or to 10,000, 12,000 years ago, right? And there's a lot of probable reasons for that. There's usually never one major explanation. Is probably by this time humans had become the most dominant uh, uh, dominant hominid group by about Neolithic period. We don't really have any evidence of other hominid groups, so they had become the dominant one. Homo sapiens had come about. Another big thing is, as we'll see here, this emerges after the last ice age. So there's a lot of environmental factors. The environment is changing. Earth is getting warmer. There's more areas to spread to. There's more rivers and fertile areas to settle in. But this is sort of this Neolithic period. This is transition of settled societies. And another feature of this is domestication of plants and animals, which we'll sort of talk about and give some examples as well. But this is sort of a typical sort of Neolithic settlement here, though, as we will see, some get much bigger than this. But ability to grow things, have animals, have permanent settlements, and that's another big sort of transition between Paleolithic and Neolithic. And the archaeological record, anyway, is Paleolithic. We have very little evidence because they didn't leave any permanent settlements, moved around a lot. Here in the Neolithic, we have permanent settlements we can look at, and at the end of this lecture, we'll look at some Neolithic sites from around the world. So just kind of to give this sort of ice age point about that, here you can kind of see the extent of these are full glacier, interglacial. This is kind of the extent of the sea ice as well. So you can see that there was all of anything north of America up here in Siberia, couldn't really settle in. But you kind of see areas where land existed that were much easier to cross here into Southeast, into over the Bering Strait into Southeast Asia. These land bridges existed, and then about 16,000 BC or 15,000 BCE, these start to retreat. So here you can kind of see the land bridge up here. Here you can also see why people could go across by ocean as well, right? You weren't going way up here; you got to go across. And humans were very good at this point of adapting to getting the resources from the sea, so people would come across. And most likely, some humans came across. So there's evidence is still trying to be worked out of humans that have come from the Europe side and settled into the Americas as well. Another big land bridge was Southeast Asia. You can see this huge, massive land here. And the thing was, what a lot of groups had come and settled here before this, and then when the ice age came about, as the oceans rose, Australia became cut off. So these indigenous peoples of Australia would never really reconnect with other parts of the world. Similar with Americas, as these sheets of ice receded, the Americas too would be cut off from this larger Eurasian landmass, which will have all sorts of world historical and human historical ramifications. So here it is, transition to settled society. And this is actually an actual city, Çatalhöyük, which we'll look at a little bit later. A recreation of it, of a map that we have from them. But you can kind of see these permanent settlements, farming along rivers. Rivers are very important to these early societies. More complex social structures, larger infrastructure, evidence of pottery, more advanced tools, not just using stones, but other metal tools as well. And the concentration of populations. And so as you get concentrations of populations, you get all sorts of things, divisions of labor, religion, all sorts of stuff going on. The Neolithic, and again, we're talking about 5,000 years here. So then, just like people didn't just start building cities. It's a process that happened over time. Here's a good example of the different domestications of plants. Here around the world that were taking place, you see these dates all along here, all in this, what is this Neolithic world. Americas, they grew corn and squash. Here, down here, this is potatoes. Here is big millet and sorghum. Millet's a grain, sorghum's a root. Fertile Crescent, right, all through here is one of the early sites of early civilization. We'll come out there. Barley, cattle, goats, wheat, and then rice, a big one over here. This is the first cultivation of rice. So kind of see, and again, that takes time as well. I mean, humans to cultivate and domesticate plants, right? You got to find the seeds that work, find the best ones that work in your climate. Keep those seeds, propagate them over time. Maybe some, maybe climate changes, you have to move, or maybe blight comes in, and all sorts of, or a drought, all sorts of things that can be challenging there. So, but as you can kind of see all the different plants that were domesticated this period. Here's a nice corn. Here's a good example of the earliest corn, and then over time they were able to take the best ones that grew more seeds, and then once you got one that grew more seeds, you could make it all sorts of different types, and then adapt them, and then they actually spread through the rest of the world. But now you have, there's different types of corn, and now you have these big corn fields all through the Midwest. Here's another wild mustard seed that's been domesticated over time. So humans adapted different types of this plant to their needs. So you got the Brussels sprouts, which were adapted after the leaf buds, cabbage and kale from the leaves themselves, kohlrabi, cauliflower, and broccoli were both adapted from the same mustard seeds, mustard plants. So you're going to see humans adapting these. It's all humans were doing this themselves. And we also do this with animals. Again, you can kind of see all the things you can get from animals, cattle particularly, food, but also leather, also the tendons you can use, all sorts of things you can pull out. The milk, obviously, dairy, horns, anything you can use all of these things. They obviously labor as well. But to get the docile cow came from these wild cows. Aurochs were the wild cows of what is now Europe. That were then, you just keep the most docile ones, get rid of the more wild ones, and then over time they become domesticated. And now you can see all the different uses of cows here, and then once we got there, now we can breed cows for different things. Angus beef, or dairy cows, or Holsteins are more dairy. And you can kind of see these different groups. Some are better workers, some aren't. And you can run this through anything. You can run this through horses, sheep, for their wool, goats, donkeys, all of these things, all of these chickens, all of these things. Humans have domesticated those from wild animals. And here's just to kind of show you a little bit of a tour of that. This is world historical. That these that all groups around the world were transitioning this Neolithic period. Here's Çatalhöyük. Again, this is this map that I told you about. This was found on inside of one of these buildings. So this is the map. These are actually the mountains behind it. So you can kind of see this city. Another big major one in Turkey is Göbekli Tepe. Here you have these big mounds. Maybe this was a religious site still getting excavated today. But it definitely shows elements of permanent settlements. East Asia, rice in China. You have these sites in China. We have rice production. Jomon, Japan, so Paleolithic settlements there. Some buildings from there. You have South Asia, India, Pakistan. We can kind of see groups there. Here's some pottery from Japan as well. Europe, we have all sorts of Neolithic sites there. Konos in Greece. We have ones in Serbia. Here's a very famous sort of Stonehenge type area in Ireland, but also famous Stonehenge in England. And again, we don't really know too much about. We still don't have any written records of these groups, but we just kind of infer of what they might have been like. And also Africa, and people settling there as well. The Nile Valley, which those Neolithic people later become the forefathers of Egypt. But you kind of see all sorts of settlements and ceramics and domestication of animals as well. The Americas have Clovis points, Olmecs, some other groups down in Chile as well. So all throughout the world, it's transitioned to more complex societies. And then also the Neolithic period is also the move away from just stones, where you start using metal first, bronze, and then sort of this Bronze Age using copper and tin. We'll talk about that a little bit more. We have weapons. These are very famous Bronze Age of China. Here's some weapons and tools. And then the next one after that, a little bit later, the Iron Age, a little bit better. But again, you have to go from bronze, the working of bronze, which was a little bit easier to work with, which then later on, iron, another technology to smelt iron. You can make much better iron tool weapons, but also things like axles for chariots and things like that. So that's the Neolithic phase. The next part of this, we'll get into the rise of civilization.